I'm going to stop my share. Put us all into a group. What do we think? We think we should get going? It's about almost 5 after. Oh, good, Nancy. Hi, Nancy. All right, I'll just keep letting people in. I'm just introducing Joan anyway, so I don't know that what I'm saying is going to be the important part of this meeting. So I'm going to get rolling. So welcome everybody. We're really glad you could join us. Want to let you know the meeting is being recorded. There were a couple people who can't make it who were very interested in hearing it. Unless anyone has any strong objections, I'd like to record it. The Hingham Community Council, just so you know, was formed to promote dialogue about topics that affect diversity and inclusion in our community and just generally our community makeup. And housing availability is, of course, one of those topics. So some members of our group have been digging in a little. Sorry, can I just ask you to mute yourself if you're not talking? Thanks. Housing availability is one of the things that we're digging into just to better understand housing policy. We're incredibly grateful to have State Representative Joan Meschino here with us tonight to give us a high-level overview of the state of housing in Massachusetts. Representative Meschino is, as probably all of you know, the representative for Hull, North Situate, Cohasset, and Hingham. She is a former 2-term select person for the town of Hull, and she served as Hull's representative to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, where she was elected by her peers to its executive committee for 10 years. So needless to say, housing is one of her many passions, and she's quite knowledgeable about it. So again, we're really glad to have her here with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the meeting over to her now.
Oh, thank you so much, Katie. I put together just a few slides if you wanted to. It just makes it easier, I think, to sort of follow. If I can share a screen, I'm really going to try to be adept and do this. Let's see.
I just made you the host, so I also can't be the muter anymore. So if somebody forgets to mute, you'll have to mute them. Okay,
can everyone see my screen? Do I also have to admit?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. So I, first of all, just want to begin by applauding the Hingham Unity Council for its work. In a short time, you've really come together and tackled what are really tough issues to have a conversation about. So I want to applaud you and all of your members and the people that have participated in the dialogue with you. Everything that we're talking about here in terms of diversity, unity, and diversity and inclusion requires us to be thoughtful and intentional in our actions. And housing, I think, is a big piece of the opportunity to accomplish some of your goals. And so I was delighted that you were, included me here today. Usually this is the last slide that I show, but since it'll be more of a discussion at the end, I just wanted to make sure everyone had a second to note down my contact information. We are remote, but we are fully operational. The office number does ring through the State House through the Revenue Committee, but just follow the key, the tree, and it will ring to my legislative aide, John, and of course, my email and the website. If there's ever any questions or anything you think we can help you with, please, 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 please. Constituent services are a top priority, so please do be sure to reach out if there's anything you think we could be helpful with. So Katie has asked me here today to talk a little bit about housing policy. So I am by no means an expert in this. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm happy to share what insights I have managed to glean over these past few years, both as a selectman in Hull for a number of years and as Hull's designee to state agencies such as our regional planning organization, MEPC. and now as your state representative, it's really put me sort of front and center to understand the critical import of housing to economic development, to diversion, to having, you know, a robust, diverse community. And just to be clear, you know, we're talking today a lot about diversity and inclusion around race. But I think it's important that we also understand that this is about generations, right? Being intergenerations. This is about gender. This is I know someone reached out to me this afternoon about developmental disabilities, but also physical disabilities. And so, you know, I'm talking about race, but really we need to understand that that it really is a broader conversation than that. So what I thought I would do was to walk through a little bit, just very high level, about sort of historic discrimination, about zoning, about diversity in housing, about the need for affordable housing. And when I say that, I mean capital A, affordable housing. And then I'm just going to walk through the slides quick, and I'll open it up for discussion. And what my goal is to share enough information with you to give some thoughts about how the system works and how this intersects with our communities and where our opportunity is to make changes. And then, you know, how to start to connect you with actual real experts on housing who can actually educate the community on ways for both public engagement around what you may choose to do or not, and what opportunities there are for you within the community. But at the end of the day, this is all about what the community decides to do, and we have to be thoughtful and intentional. Okay, so I'm sure it comes as no surprise to anyone here that there has been, in the course history of the United States, historic housing discrimination. And I don't think I have to explain what redlining is to anybody. I mean, that was back in the 30s. That was literally a map with red ink that crossed out areas where banks wouldn't lend. And as you might imagine, based on segregation and historically segregated policies, a lot of what they were doing was not lending to communities of color, communities of minority communities. Why I start here is because what that really does is it sets up a historic wealth gap. So when you really think about it, you know, I mentioned at the beginning that we're talking about race, but it's also about gender, intergeneration. It's about socioeconomic. But at the end of the day, this is all about money and wealth and who has access to opportunity. And so what segregation really did was it meant that white people could continue to borrow and lend and have the ability to purchase homes and land in communities where there were resources and economic activity and opportunity, and their wealth, they could leverage their wealth to purchase that, and then their wealth could grow. If you're not lending to communities of color, and they're excluded from economic opportunity. And so what it does is it sets up a disparity in access to wealth, access to banks, and to access to opportunity. And that's both educational and economic. The Fair Housing Act of 1968, you know, came in with, you know, the 60s was a whole sweeping suite of bills around civil rights, and fair housing was probably one of the most important ones, and it changed the redlining. But there's sort of, the reason I mention it is because segregation is alive and well today. I tried to find this, I had done a report when I was working at Appleseed, and we were part of an educational diversity and educational law task force, and looking at that sort of intersection. And if you really look at some of the major cities and their school districts, what you really see is and the suburbs, the wealthy suburbs, are all white, and they ring cities that are all people of color, and the school districts are all people of color. It's really fascinating. So segregation, whether it might not be directly imposed, but it is still historically there, and it is still self-imposed to some extent. So it's fascinating when you really look at the historic nature of it. Segregation is alive and well, and then how it plays out is really a fascinating thing. I do just want to mention, as we're having this conversation, to keep in mind that we're talking about wealth, and when we talk about socioeconomic diversity, that can mask other kinds of disparities, race, for example, gender, for example. I could just share with you that the people who call my office looking for help with housing are women, older white women who are on their own, whether they're a widow or they're single for whatever reason, divorced for whatever reason. So, I mean, there's definitely trends, and it's just interesting to see who finds themselves even today as unbanked. So you cannot talk about housing without talking about zoning. Zoning, I mean, we all understand what it is. I glanced at the chat or the participants as it came in. I recognize a lot of your names. I know you're very engaged. You all know what zoning is. Zoning is just simply the bylaws locally in our community that just say about where land use planning is. And it's just land use planning designation, and it's local planning. It's the what we can do where and when. It's the activity. And when zoning came in, it to some extent zoning overlaid where existing activity was, and then zoning is just something that we decide moving forward. Now, part of the challenge is that, and zoning is a good thing, right? Zoning is good for public health. It's good for economic activity. It's good for environmental protection. We need zoning. It's a good thing. There's a lot of good reasons, and there's a lot of good outcomes for zoning. Part of the problem, though, with zoning is that it creates unintended barriers. And so if you think about those barriers, what it does is it reinforces over time historic uses. So looking at Hingham, which is a absolutely beautiful community, Hingham has a tremendous amount of single homes, single home lots, and large lots of land, and which is part of the character and nature and what makes it so beautiful. Also makes it very expensive. And so if you're thinking back to our segregation conversation 2 slides ago, if you have groups of people that are historically unbanked, that have great disparities over generations of time on wealth, right? That don't have access to mortgages, don't have access to education, don't have access to high-paying jobs, don't have proximity to those opportunities, right? Because it's about location and it's about access. We've been having a huge conversation about transportation, public transportation and ferries, transit-oriented development. You have to have access to transit. You have to have access to get to jobs. I mean, that's what it's all about. And so what ends up happening is the way our communities develop initially tend to be the way that our communities stay, and the zoning really becomes ingrained. Now, zoning is a choice. It's something that we decide how we're going to do. So again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about being intentional. And there's nothing good or bad about zoning. It just is. It's what the community decides. So, but the challenge is that we have open town meeting, and it requires a pretty significant threshold to make changes, 2/3 of town meeting, in fact. And that's a pretty high threshold. Historically, any kinds of changes that we're making, it's hard sometimes to predict how those will go. And oftentimes, at least in my district, we see some reticence on town meeting to make dramatic changes. But one of the things that does create one of these barriers and really leads to sort of historic ingrained in nature of a community is the zoning. So we should at least have that conversation. What I wanted to talk about next was sort of thinking about that historic nature of segregation, and that it's ongoing, and that it put us on a path for an ever widening wealth gap, right? And now we're thinking about what is our zoning, what does it historically look like? You know, I think the question that you're really asking is, what is the opportunity for positive change, for positive policy change? And I think how you ask that question in some ways becomes even more important, because asking the question, how you ask it will lead towards the answer that you ultimately will end up with. One of the questions that Katie and Ness had sort of asked me originally was, do you need housing? So the answer to that question is an uncategorical yes. Our regional planning agency, MAPC, has been working on sort of with housing advocates on housing evaluations and numbers. And I'm not going to pretend I can, off the top of my head, quote some of the projections. But if you go on mapc.org, which is our planning agency, you can read what some of the housing gaps are projected for the metropolitan area planning area, right? So we're part of the Boston area. More locally, the South Shore Chamber, which has put out its 2030 plan, and again, you can just go on the South Shore Chamber and access all of these planning documents, has been engaged in a dialogue around economic development and really trying to attract the kind of workforce to the South Shore region that will support the kinds of commercial and business and to some extent industrial use that they feel is appropriate here in the South Shore, and that really can keep us economically vibrant. And one of the big things that they actually identified was really three things, right? So it's the transit, public transportation, it's the infrastructure that we need. So think water, sewer, power, but also housing. And they're looking at it very much through this lens of workforce housing. Governor Baker also has, on a statewide level, is looking at the economic development and the vitality for Massachusetts economy in various sectors. We're thinking about it more from a regional perspective, but the governor, in fact, has put forward an act to promote housing choices. Now, it's somewhat controversial. You wouldn't think the governor would put something forward quite this controversial, but what he's actually proposing in here is to change some of the thresholds for zoning choices for town meeting. If you talk to your Hingham planner, she can really illuminate for you what some of the challenges are and why we might consider making some of these changes. And really what it's all focused on is being intentional about creating the kind of affordable, small a, just sort of generally speaking, affordable housing for, teachers, nurses, people who work in the region, people who, work at town hall, people who work in the local shops, the people who work at Stop and Shop. So it's really meant to be, how do you attract the workforce housing? How do you attract the workforce through housing so that you can support the economic development that you want here? And in fact, there are a range of housing options. I didn't list them here, but you're all familiar with the kinds of housing that create density. So look at the Hingham shipyard. There's an affordable housing component to there. Think about what the Hingham selectmen did We have statewide affordability requirements through 40B. And, you know, the Hingham Selectmen actually wisely, I thought it was really brilliant, put the affordable housing right next to sort of an economic area and next to the transit-oriented development. So, you know, there's a range of housing options. One of the big things now is looking at downtown areas. And so you have mixed use, right? So you have shops on the bottom, apartments on the top. Accessory apartments. Please don't tell anyone in hell I said that. It's always a hot topic in all the accessory apartments, but these are all pieces that are options for the communities like Hingham to consider. And in fact, you have a terrific planner, you have a tremendous planning board, you have an excellent zoning board of appeals. So in fact, Hingham really does it right and is very well equipped to have the kind of conversation that you're interested in having with your town leaders. So I said affordable housing, small a minute ago. I think we should talk a little bit about affordable housing, capital A. So when we talk about affordable housing, what sort of municipal leaders and state leaders and planners are talking about is deed restricted housing. So, and there's a range of housing options. So I was just talking about the kinds of housing that you could cultivate in your community. There are other types of housing that are supported by policies from the state. So I mentioned senior and family housing. That's your safety net housing. That is the housing where your elders live when they're downsized and when they can't afford an apartment. You can apply and you can get into, and it's fine. You have to be financially eligible. And Hingham actually is tremendous. So we have a housing authority, but then you also have that's run by the state, but you also have a housing authority that's run by the town, which most places don't have. And I can tell you that for the seniors, as well as for the family housing, there is tremendous unmet need there, tremendous unmet need. And we are losing people from our district who cannot afford to stay here to other parts. And this is very important to us because we want an intergenerational community. But we're also, to the extent that we're pushing people away or that there's not an ability for people to stay local, we're separating them sometimes from family, from their friends, if they're informal supports, their formal supports. And, you know, again, we have to be thinking about how we do that. And the state has not put forward additional family or senior housing in a long time. And I think it's a conversation that that we should be having with DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development. There's also Chapter 40B, which I mentioned a minute ago. Every community in the state is required to have 10% of its housing stock as deed restricted affordable housing. And as you grow, the 10% number gets higher. So you always have to be very mindful of where you're at with your housing production and also how you are complying with Chapter 40B. The biggest reason, well, we should all want to create affordable housing. Ideally, we all want to have affordable housing in our communities because we want to have diverse housing, both socioeconomically, intergenerationally, what have you. But it is a requirement, and sort of you want to keep at that 10% threshold because then you can control what housing projects come your way. And you know, I think, I just an opinion that, you know, I watched Hingham do it, and you guys really hold developers, you know, really feet to the fire. And you know, you can't always say no, but you really make it the best project that that you can. And I think that it's just tremendously admirable how well it's done. But we should want affordable housing in our community because it does lead to the kind of diversity that we're talking about. And it needs to be, when we're talking affordable housing, capital A, it does need to be deed restricted, and we should be thinking not even just about how we create our housing stock, but also how we preserve our housing stock. So essentially, that was my sort of broad overview. And what I thought would be useful is to just open it up to a conversation about how, where, what, why, what resources we might need, might want. And so maybe what I'll do is I'm going to stop sharing. I think I did. And turn it back over to Katie. And just to sort of enter into a discussion. I feel that, these kinds of conversations really, they should always be ongoing, and we should always be thoughtful about, what's going on in our community, how to make it more attractive, how to make it really reflect sort of the nature of who we are as a community. And I think that the dialogue that you've initiated is really tremendous. And the description that Katie and Ness sent me were basically, we could do a whole course off of it. But what I've really just tried to do here is to frame a little bit about the history, and to commit to having a partnership and a dialogue with you about the dialogue and how we might move forward, and where the opportunities for positive change for our community exist. So I'll turn it back to Katie.
Okay, well, thank you, Joan. That was a great kind of high level lay of the land, which is, like I said at the beginning, I think I said this before everybody got on. One of the things the Unity Council is trying to do is just kind of make sure we know where we're coming from before we start even trying to do anything, and also see what folks around town are doing. We had a presentation from the Affordable Housing Trust that was just to our group. We're going to speak with the Housing Authority. We really want to make sure we work all together, not just go off on our own and do our own thing. Sorry, that's my dog. This was a great early step in that process. And I guess I'd love to open it up to anybody here who has questions, clarifications, comments, ideas about what Joan said, or came in with a question that she didn't touch on. Is there anybody who has something? I see Anne's hand, and also while she's talking, or as we go along, if you want to do the hand raise feature, that's fine too, and I'll just call on people in order. Anne?
Yes, thank you so much, Representative Meschino. You're so generous with your time, and we really appreciate the slides you shared with us today. And I thought it was so fitting that you framed zoning as creating unintentional barriers, because that's exactly what we set out to kind of uncover in our Hingham Community Council group. And I guess one thing that we've been struggling with is, you kind of mentioned that this segregation is a manifestation of generations of decisions and policies. And, we can't change the past, but moving forward, how does a town like Hingham kind of think beyond our town limits to the broader needs of the Boston area, and kind of realize that we have a role to play in helping address the housing needs? And I guess my concerns and thoughts kind of stem from this NIMBY attitude that can pop up on occasion. I mean, certainly there are a lot of residents that view housing diversity as a benefit, as an asset, but how can we kind of almost like advertise and promote the need and kind of get more residents to have more buy-in and engagement in encouraging both, I guess, capital A and small a affordable housing?
I think that's a great question. All right, so first of all, you have to promise to call me Joan.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan. I think you're right. I mean, so, my personal feeling is that, I agree with you. I mean, I feel like when you have a more diverse community, you know, there's a lot of joy that comes from that. And it's interesting, it's more fulfilling, you know, it's more engaging. It just, so, you know, from that perspective, you know, I agree with you. I mean, I enjoy, you know, meeting new people. I don't have to do the admit anymore, do I? Or are you in charge of the meeting now, Katie? Okay. I mean, I will, but it's just, but anyway, you know, and I think when you look to the larger sort of metropolitan region, you know, Hingham can be very much a part of
Joan, I'm wrong. You have to make me the host again. I apologize. I thought you did. Just click more next to your name and make me the host.
Okay.
I apologize.
Second. No problem. Oops, hold on. Let me go over and do it this way. I'm sorry. It won't let me. It just won't let me move the cursor. I'm sorry. Hold on. There we go. There it goes. Why can't I find my own name?
You're second on my list.
I know. Oh, it doesn't. Hold on 1 second, guys.
There should be a little, when you hover, there should be a little more.
Right. Let's see. I'm sorry. 1 second. There I am. Okay, hold on. More. Oh, it just wants, it doesn't, okay, hold on. It doesn't want me to, let's see. I'm sorry. I think I might be, it just wants me to rename myself. So I apologize. It doesn't want to let me.
That's really weird. You're like the permanent host. Okay, well, so you do have to let people in, but otherwise.
That's all right.
Sorry
Okay.
about that.
No worries. I've done it before. I apologize. This isn't my happy space doing technology stuff. But anyway, so Anne, I apologize. To your point, you know, I think that there's a lot of ways into this dialogue, and there's a lot of reasons why. You know, people don't have to necessarily be like looking to solve a larger problem or be a part of the solution for the larger part. They can simply just be interested in economic development in the region and economic development in the town. So I worry less about the why. I focus more on the creating of the opportunity. And in fact, Hingham has done a tremendous job. You know, when you look at the Hingham Shipyard, Hewitt's Cove, that is a transit-oriented development. That is creating density in an appropriate space, right, with the appropriate connections to infrastructure, to transit, and that has sustained the housing. And I think the piece of it is to take every opportunity to include affordability with whatever housing, you know, development projects you're doing. And as I referenced earlier, in fact, the Hingham Selectmen, I thought, were really forward-looking in terms of selecting and working prospectively with developers to achieve their 10% goal, because that gives them the ability to guide and to shape projects, which is something that the community happens to do incredibly well. And so I think it's less about persuading people. I mean, I think we should, but I agree with you in that. But people don't need to be thinking about it from that same perspective to get to the same place as that you are at. But I do think that it is persuasive. It's very persuasive to be part of a regional housing solution. South Shore Chamber has looked at the South Shore region and identified it as one of their top initiatives. And has done a lot even with your business council to promoting that. So I think it's about looking for who the partners are in the strategies that are going to have the outcomes that you're interested in. And I think that the South Shore Chamber is going to be a tremendous partner. They have been a tremendous partner in our advocacy to save public transit on both the Greenbush and the line and the commuter ferry. So I think that's where I'd more look for is who are your partners. That's what I would think. Yeah.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I wrote down South Shore Chamber with an asterisk beside it. So.
Well, you have a very active Hingham Business Council that participates in the, and I am not going to think of the name of the gentleman that runs it because I am trying too hard to think about it, but I can send it to you. I mean, you all know who it is. I'm just not thinking of his name right now as I'm sitting here because I'm trying. So senior moment apologies. So, but you already have a local partner in that effort.
Yeah. I see Laura raising her hand. Laura Harbottle.
Hi, I'm sorry I haven't made it to a whole bunch of your meetings, but this one really popped out at me because it's an issue that I was a little bit involved with when I worked for the town of Scituate. And I just wanted to respond from maybe a little bit different point of view than Joan, because I had a different role in government. So I was kind of in the trenches with some of the housing issues that would come up in local government on the South Shore. And one thing that I think it might have even come up in this group before, but as far as diversity with that affordability and where those two things intersect, when towns do affordable, well, they don't directly do it, but they have a role in overseeing how lotteries are run and how those affordable units get distributed. And one of the things that the state requires is that those units have to be advertised in communities with different racial makeups than Hingham has. So there is an outreach to really a diverse, diverse group of people to be buying those units. The other thing I wanted to, so I hope maybe that answers something, or maybe that wasn't your question at all, and it's just something that I find interesting. So if it wasn't your question, I apologize. But the other thing that I think is really important, and this came up for me, I worked for a town on the Cape after I retired, doing some consulting on accessory dwellings and how to make them a little bit more available to people. And it was the town of Brewster. And it was very interesting. The planning board took the lead on wanting to expand the town's supply of affordable housing. And that's something the Hingham Planning Board may be doing. I don't know, but I think you could reach out to them and find out, exactly what maybe you've already done that. The other thing is that once they decide to take the lead and they have a particular direction, they're going to need support. They're going to need allies. They're going to need people coming to town meeting. They're going to need people that know who the realtors are, who are open-minded about affordability, because certainly it doesn't always work to their interest. Their interest is in making money, and affordable housing doesn't make as much money as like your $3 million house for them. So there may be some, though, that have more of a sense of moral obligation. So all of that kind of information is information that you all probably have, and that you could probably support, your boards that do want to make some of these changes. So sorry to go on.
No, Laura makes a couple of really important points. The Department of Housing and Community Development and organizations like MAPC have they have grant money for things like creating a housing production plan. I feel confident that Hingham has a housing production plan. It's one of those tools like any other for the larger planning that communities do. So just as you would have an open space plan, you probably have a housing production plan. So that might be a great resource for you to look at and just even see what is on the books for projects, for developments, what lots are available. I mean, my guess is that Mary has all of that readily accessible at her fingertips. And, you know, I've never personally talked, you know, that's not my role, right? I'm at the state level. So, you know, to the extent that you're looking for grants, or you're looking for, you know, help with navigating any of the state programs, you know, that's really where I come into it. But I mean, I think having a conversation with your town planner and your planning board would be really fascinating. There's not a minute I am in her presence that I don't learn something. And she's very, you know, very seasoned, very experienced, and I think she's doing a terrific job. So so I would encourage you to follow Laura's advice and actually reach out and have that conversation. And there are, like I said, there's a lot of grant money out there right now, especially around public engagement on topics such as inclusion. So, you know, certainly a place like MAPC is the kind of place that has technical assistant grant money that would probably be more something for the town. But it's also a place where you can go for strategies for diversity and inclusion and programming and things like that. So it's a great point, Laura. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And those are all, some of these are new to us, but some of these are groups are on our list to get to eventually. As we plod through this, it's very complicated and there's a lot of different levels. Are there other folks who have thoughts, questions? I see, oh, I thought I saw Peter Allen's hand raised. Did you pop it up and pop it down? Oh, I see Ray Estie's hand.
No, that wasn't me.
Okay.
I'm listening and enjoying everything. Thank you, guys.
Hi, Katie. Thanks. Hi, Joan. Thanks for doing this. I think it's a long time coming, and it's actually pretty timely because I think tomorrow evening, the master plan committee in Hingham is going to be meeting, and the consultant they hired that did a 1.5 year long exercise to help develop a proposed new master plan is going to be delivering recommendations. And among those recommendations are a number of housing items. So it's quite timely, actually, that you're doing this, and it's very appreciated. The only thing that I would share, and full disclosure, it's a little self-serving, but at the same time, I think it solves, or potentially could solve, a larger issue that faces our community, and that's how to provide housing for family members, particularly in-laws, particularly grown children who may be experiencing difficulties, whether mental or physical, or what have you, and we want to keep them close. If you recall, in Hingham about 3 years ago, we passed an amendment to the zoning bylaw that allowed for accessory dwelling units within the main dwelling. And so that essentially allows you to have an in-law apartment, if you will. And this is old news to Gordon, I'm sure. What I have been looking into over the last 1.5 years or so, and have had a number of discussions with the planning board, and am pursuing now, hopefully for next town meeting, is an amendment, a further amendment to the zoning bylaw, which will essentially extend the accessory dwelling unit use to not only within the main dwelling, but also to detached structures that are on properties, properties in town. So this is an old town. It's been around a long time, and there's a lot of properties that have, whether it's a garage or a barn or a little cottage or a carriage house or some secondary structure on the property, many of which over the years have been refurbished to include some living conditions, some kitchens, bathrooms, bedrooms, living rooms, whatever. And the bylaw doesn't allow two dwellings on the same lot currently. So what's being proposed is simply an extension of the accessory dwelling unit use that's currently allowed in the main dwelling to an accessory structure on the property, keeping the same restrictions in place that would limit it to use by family or caregivers of family, things of that nature. So it would provide another opportunity for folks who have in-laws or elderly parents, for instance, or a situation where maybe grown kids come home, the grown kids and their family want to live in the main house, and the older folks move to the barn in the back. Or maybe you have a child in their 20s who, has physical or mental difficulties, and you'd like them to be able to live independently, yet keep them close. So it provides that opportunity. So that's what is being pursued currently. But I think it adds another dimension to fulfilling some housing needs in our town, particularly where we have really, I think, hundreds, and I'm in the process of doing an inventory, really, I think hundreds of properties that have these accessory structures on them that could be utilized in this way. So it seems to me that it's a very opportune way to provide some additional housing for family members in the categories that I explained, without building more, without getting into concerns about fair housing laws. Certainly I acknowledge the need for housing on kind of the global stage, and certainly, in the South Shore, around Greater Boston, within the Commonwealth. I don't know the best ways to try to accomplish that from a community perspective, given the limitations on land that we have, and the difficulties in development in town that exist. And certainly now that we've met our 10% 40B threshold, it's less likely to see more development in that vein in the next 5 to 10 years, but who knows? But I think what I'm proposing, and I think there's a lot of folks who support it, and now that we've seen the accessory dwelling unit in place, that's been in existence in the main dwelling for about 3 years, we've seen some success come from that. So I think it's probably timely to investigate this further opportunity, and now, particularly in conjunction with the issuance of the master plan recommendations that certainly do include some housing recommendations, although I haven't seen them specifically. But I know that I think they're aligned with the goals and objectives of the master plan that were presented about 3 years ago or so. It seems to me an opportune time to explore this that would provide some additional opportunity, as I said, to folks in town who have the need for family members. So I just wanted to share that. I had mentioned it to Joan recently, and I thought I would share it with folks, that it will be on, well, hopefully will be on the town meeting agenda for April. It's been submitted as a citizens petition, and I look forward to exploring this and talking to folks more about it as the months go.
Ray, Andrew, just quickly, because there's a couple more people with their hands up, but just a quick question. Does the provision also support any non-family members, or is it only for family members?
So the amendment that I proposed is essentially a revision to the existing bylaw, which restricts use of ADUs to family members and caregivers. I think the concern of folks a few years ago when this was originally passed, and maybe Gordon can speak to this, or maybe he doesn't want to speak to this, and that's fine. But I think the concern at the time was, one, if we're looking to provide accessory dwelling units and make it available to the general public, we have to be careful about adhering to fair housing laws. I think even when the ADU bylaw was passed 3 years ago, we received a memo or a caveat from the Attorney General's office that expressed concern about the potential issues surrounding fair housing laws. I actually am very interested in this topic, as if you didn't tell, and couldn't tell, and reached out to the Attorney General's office after that and had discussions with them at length, and did my own research about the fair housing laws, and feel fairly comfortable that the concerns that they expressed and the caveats were really just a kind of CYA situation, and based on the parameters of our ADU bylaw currently, limiting it to families, not really allowing it to be sold or rented, that it wouldn't fall under the umbrella of the fair housing restrictions, because those are specifically related to housing that's for sale or for rent. So I tried to limit it in the amendment that I'm proposing to really just expanding the existing bylaw to detached structures, but in keeping with the limitations already in place with respect to family and caregivers.
Yeah, it's an interesting example of small changes trying to expand access, and the real restrictions that zoning has in place, and how hard it is to not only to make change, but to make incremental change, and to make positive incremental change. So it's actually a really interesting example, and I think it's also speaks to the broader educational sort of public engagement role that a group like yours can play, because these are initiatives that take time. Good government moves slowly and deliberatively and thoughtfully, and town meeting is basically Hingham's legislative body, right? And so it's a deliberative body, and and it always behooves us to be educating ourselves on unconscious bias, on disparities, on inadvertent barriers, on all of these kinds of topics, so that as we're making these decisions, we're thinking about these kinds of issues and asking these kinds of questions. So I think it's a great subject for Ray to bring up to us today, and it begs sort of how we get broader involvement, as we're making these discussions and having these deliberations, because it takes a long time. It's probably been a couple of years in the making for your master planning, and that's why it's never too soon and never too late to jump in, and to sort of infuse these kinds of ideas and thinking and initiatives into the planning process, and make them, to really get them in there, because Ray is showing you how hard it is.
So we got a couple more people with their hands up. Megan was next. If you want to go ahead, Megan, and then Gordon, and then I'm conscious of everyone's time and Representative Joan's time. So you can go ahead, Megan.
So one of the ways to fund affordable housing is through the Community Preservation Committee. The CPC is basically one of the things commission mandated, I'm not sure the right word, by the state to help fund affordable housing initiatives in town. And also tomorrow night is the next CPC meeting, where we will be discussing an ask for money by the Affordable Housing Trust. And I think that if you are free for tomorrow night, it might be a really interesting conversation for people to watch, just to sort of see lots of the different things that happen, a lot of the different sort of factors at play as we discuss the request. And the vote's not going to happen for a couple more meetings, but tomorrow is going to be a really interesting meeting. That's going to be at about 7 o'clock, and all the information is posted on the town website.
Unfortunately, is that also at the same time that they're announcing this whole master plan draft? Because that came out of the blue. It was supposed to be next week, and they moved it up a week. And I think a lot of people want to hear that too. So is your meeting recorded?
I don't think so. It's a little vague. It's supposed to be, but sort of Zoom links go around afterwards. I'm trying to get the town to put our meetings up on YouTube. I think our meeting is going to be really interesting, and I obviously the master plan is really important, but for people who are interested in watching sort of NIMBY things go down, I just want to say that I think it would be really interesting to tune into our meeting tomorrow.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you for all your work, Megan.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Gordon, you're up.
So it's a good segue, I guess. So yes, the master plan schedule got juggled a little bit. Tomorrow will be the time where the draft recommendations are presented primarily by the consultant team to the public. It'll be recorded like this, but my understanding is also HCAM will be recording it and then replaying it frequently. So there'll be multiple opportunities for folks to see that. The idea behind that is that if folks have comments or questions or input on those draft recommendations, that those would go to the planning board, not to the master plan committee. And the planning board won't be having its hearing probably, I think right now, until the end of January or February. So there will be time for the public to be able to weigh in and provide the actual body that will adopt the plan, that input. As folks have said, the master plan committee has been at this for a bit over a year. It was about this time a year ago where we're deep into the visioning sessions, where we heard, frankly, quite a bit about housing diversity and demographic diversity in town. And as Ray mentioned, we've had a fair amount of conversation about that within our meetings. I think I saw Nancy Kerber on as well, who's a fellow committee member. And it is on a range of topics, from alternative ways of funding the Affordable Housing Trust to allow us to be a bit more proactive and a little less reactive in the development of affordable housing, both as a good and to maintain that 10% so that we maintain some level of control over it. So there are a number of draft recommendations in there. I will say they are drafts. We have a big committee, but ultimately it will be the planning board's responsibility to adopt the master plan. So there will be opportunities, whether it's through online comments or waiting for the public hearing, for folks to weigh in on any number of the recommendations. You will be surprised how many there are. We've been busy, and in this Zoom environment, it's a little bit harder, right? It'd be much easier if we were all sitting around a table hashing those things out. But we're getting there, and the schedule's been sort of juggled into late a little bit. And I would say I think the planning board is waiting for that document and waiting for the input from the master plan committee and those draft recommendations on where to act. I will probably defer on any comments related to Ray's proposal, just because it's going to come before us and I'll be sitting on the planning board for the hearing. So I probably shouldn't sort of weigh in on that specifically right now. But juggling meetings is tricky, right? I'm going to head down to the harbor virtually for the 3A task force when we're done here. And hopefully there will be other opportunities for folks to see that draft recommendations presentation after that, so you can weigh in. So thank you all. Of course, I should have started by saying that this level of engagement, which we had last year and we continue to have in the development of the Unity Council, I think is a really strong sign for that level of input and communication. So I appreciate it.
And really, Gordon, thank you. I mean, your work, it just shows how hard you work, how thoughtful you are, and you're always at it. You're amazing. So thank you for your service as well.
We'll see if there's anything left of me at the end of it, but it's been a great process with an amazing committee that has stayed committed throughout. So should be great.
It shows. It really shows.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Gordon. I don't regret holding signs for you. So I don't think anybody else has their hands up, and that is kind of probably good because it's 8:02 and I'm sure we have some Zoom fatigue. Joan, we're really grateful that you came and gave us this kind of broad overview. It's really great for a lot of us who are just dipping our toes in the water here and really trying to get our arms around a lot of this. And thank you to everyone who had such great questions and comments, and those of you who are already doing this work in our community. We're very respectful of that and only hope to help and augment the work that's already being done. So gratitude to you all, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you so much for putting this together.
Have a
Great
great
to see you all. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye. Thank you too.
Thank you, Joan, too.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, everybody.